Today we're going to be taking notes on Building the Transcontinental Railroad by Iris Chang. It is not the next text in your book. We're actually skipping a text, but there's a reason why we're skipping it. So this text is more of an informational text, and the other one was more of a fictional text, and I want to stick with the trend of we're working with nonfiction, so I skipped over the text that was coming next. So we're going to take some notes to get us started. Because this is an informational text, we're going to talk about analyzing informational text. Building the Transcontinental Railroad is a historical narrative. Now, a historical narrative is an account of real events that happened in the past. So somebody is telling the story of what actually happened. So everything in here is true. It's not historical fiction, which is where it's based on real events, but some things are made up. Historical narratives are completely true. Writers of historical narratives try to accurately depict events as they happened. So they don't take as many liberties as, historical fiction writers do, or normal fiction writers, for example. Writers of historical narratives normally present events in chronological order. So chronological order, you should know, is the order of events in which they actually occurred. So for example, if we look at the picture on the left, you buy the ingredients to make a pie, then you make the pie, and the last thing you do is you eat the pie. Okay, so you're telling the story like, hey, first I did this, then finally I did this, okay? So it's the order of events in which they actually happened. This organizational design allows Chang to develop the sequence of events over the course of the text. And sorry, it says allows, it should be allows. So we know going into this, as we read, she's going to tell the story exactly how it happened. First this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Dates and time order signal words, such as finally, later, and then, help show the connections between events. As you read, try to keep track of important events and dates. So if we're talking about chronological order, we all know the order in which, well, not all, but most of us probably are aware the order in which the Marvel movies came out, right? But if we were to watch the movies in the order that they theoretically happened, this would be the viewing order. This would be how you should watch them. You should start with Captain America, then Captain Marvel, then Iron Man, then Iron Man 2, then Thor, Hulk, etc. Okay, finally ending with Avengers Endgame. Even though these movies did not come out in this order. Okay? Genre elements of historical writing. It's normally written in third person, he, she, they. Usually presents events in chronological order, places events in their historical, social, or economic context, meaning like in history, so social would be like, think culture, and economic is, obviously anything to do with money. Based on facts from primary and secondary sources, primary sources come, we discussed this earlier in the year, but primary sources come directly from the source. So somebody that was actually there witnessing the event and then they're telling it. And then secondary sources would be like, I saw a fight happen and I told Mr. Ali and now Mr. Ali is telling you. He would then be a secondary source. So it's somebody that was alive during that time but wasn't actually there. They heard the information secondhand, which is why it's a secondary source. Analyzing author's purpose. Now you should know author's purpose is his or her reason, the author's reason for writing. An author's purpose may be suggested by her diction, aka word choice, and the way he or she describes events. So for example, in this particular text, phrases that reveal Iris Chang's tone might suggest her purpose for telling the story of Chinese laborers. So you're going to look for clues on why is this person telling the story, okay? there has to be some reason. What drove that person to sit down and write the story, especially if it's one that they weren't alive for. For example, there's a book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is by a woman named Rebecca Skloot. Now, Rebecca Skloot is writing about this woman, Henrietta Lacks, and everything that happened to her, but she wrote about her in the 2000s when what happened to the woman happened back in the 1950s and 60s. Why would she sit down and tell this story? Well, she had reasons for doing so. In her case, she thought that Henrietta Lacks' family deserved justice and her story deserved to be heard because she was mistreated, blah, blah, blah. So as you read this, why would Chang sit down and write this story? What is the reason? What does she want her audience to do as a result of reading the story? It's not just to bore you. I wouldn't think anyways. Now, authors might also include particular information from primary sources or secondary sources that support his or her purpose. I already explained primary and secondary sources, but do know that there is information from these sources deliberately included. Now, as you read, you should be asking yourself these questions to determine and analyze Iris Chang's purpose. What is Chang's attitude toward the treatment of Chinese laborers? What details and events does Chang emphasize in the account? And how do certain descriptions and quotations add power to Chang's message? These are 3 questions you will absolutely be answering as we read this text. Because you have to sit and consider, okay, how does she feel about how Chinese laborers were treated? Does she like it? Does she not like it? Whatever. What details and events does Chang emphasize in the account? So what does she spend more time discussing over others, right? So in the example I gave before of Henrietta Lacks, Skloot spends more time discussing how the family wasn't aware of anything that was happening. And it was really likely that Henrietta Lacks herself wasn't aware of what was happening to her, right? So she's focusing on this to emphasize the mistreatment of this African-American family. Last question, how do certain descriptions and quotations add power to Chang's message? What we're looking at here is when we're adding details, or when the author is adding details, how do these details add power or strength to the message? They don't just add random primary, secondary sources just for the sake of it, right? They're all strategically placed. So why and how are these descriptions taking place? Now, typically speaking, authors have three main reasons for writing: to persuade, to inform, or entertain. It is your job to determine what these are. And obviously you will figure out how this is being done by, is there mostly facts? Are there opinions given, or are there just characters and everything's made up? So these are how you can kind of get an idea for what the purpose is, generally speaking, and then you can sort of zone in and become more specific. All right, so for today, I want you to do the critical vocabulary. You're going to follow the same same structure of assignment as normal, where you define the term and then you use the term in your own sentence. I did put the directions in the left-hand column if you need them. The words are on the right. So we have 4 for this text: formidable, expedience, diligence, and systematize. All right, so these are the 4 words I want you to define and then use in your own sentence, and I will see you guys next week.